Before he was discovered dead, nude, and shot in the head, he was the Superman of the world. They referred to it as self-harm. However, forensic errors, Hollywood's darkest secrets, and unspoken admissions suddenly suggest something terrible. Stay with us because everything is changed by what actually occurred to George Reeves. Let's begin. How George Reeves was created and destroyed by Hollywood. In 1914, George Reeves was born in Woolstock, Iowa, as George Kiefer Brewer. He and his mother relocated to Pasadena, California, following the divorce of his parents. He was unique in school, not only because of his size but also because of his abilities. He was an amateur boxer with skill, has a great stage presence, and performed a variety of instruments. A Hollywood casting director noticed him at the Pasadena Playhouse after he gave that final gift. Reeves signed with Warner Brothers in the late 1930s, and a little role in Gone with the Wind was his first major break. Tall and attractive, he had the style that the studios favored at the time. His career appeared to be about to take off, but everything changed during World War II. Reeves left Hollywood for a few years after enlisting in the Army Air Corps. Hollywood had advanced to more recent phases by the time he returned. Reeves had trouble landing prominent jobs after the war. His name had lost its buzz, and he alternated between theater work and unmemorable roles. When he was chosen to play Superman in the brand new television series Adventures of Superman in 1952, that all changed. He immediately became well known throughout America for the part. He was viewed by children as the true Man of Steel. In the eyes of the audience, George Reeves was Superman, not a character. However, he was also constrained by the same role that made him famous. Superman was not wanted in other films by the producers. Reeves' career suffered greatly as a result of being typecast. Studios feared that in any other character, audiences wouldn't take him seriously. According to reports, Alfred Hitchcock even rejected him for Psycho because he was worried that audiences would see Superman rather than the character. In addition to being stuck in his career, Reeves was also locked in his finances. Reeves earned relatively little money from his renowned role, in contrast to today's superhero actors. There were no significant endorsement deals, and the show had limited funding. He started making appearances in costume at public gatherings, schools, and grocery stores in order to make ends meet. Even if these appearances didn't pay well, they maintained him in the public eye. A single instance from this era demonstrates how hazy the distinction between fact and illusion had become. A little boy allegedly took a loaded rifle to a live event in an attempt to determine whether Superman was actually bulletproof. The kid was quietly calmed by Reeves, who explained that the bullets might bounce and injure other people. Whether or not the narrative is entirely accurate, it shows how dangerous the man in the suit had become and how deeply the public had come to believe in Superman. In the background, George was in disarray. In an attempt to cope with the mounting stress and disappointment, he began drinking more frequently. Despite his public persona, his private life revealed a different picture. A shift was noticed by friends. He appeared weary, irate, and aloof. His once dreamlike fame was now a burdensome chain around his neck. He was abandoned by the entertainment industry. Directors of casting would not see him. He was not receiving offers for movies. He was overlooked even in commercials. In a town that praised adaptability, he had become a one-role actor. Reeves persisted, though. He wanted to get behind the camera and began to experiment with directing. Beyond the Superman outfit, he thought he had more to give. However, the doors remained generally closed and the offers came slowly. It felt like there was no end in sight, and every step forward was like pushing uphill. The public's fixation on the Superman image only made matters worse. People anticipated Superman, not George, in restaurants, airports, and retail establishments. He had to maintain his composure, smile, and manners at all times. However, the pressure devastated him when he was alone himself. No one respected him, yet he was well known everywhere. He was more than lonely. He was alone. Actors that were stranded were not supported by Hollywood. There were no plans for a comeback or discussions about mental health. Reeves was gradually being pushed out, and you were either in or out. And everyone, George included. George had come to represent both achievement and failure by the late 1950s. Millions of people loved him, yet he lived in silent sorrow. His notoriety had turned into a liability. He became famous because of Superman, but his true identity was also erased. And something far darker would shortly follow that identity issue. George's life started to fall apart as his career possibilities dried up and his personal issues became more pressing. However, nobody was aware of how awful things had gotten. Not quite yet. That night, George Reeves' house had 5 individuals inside, but nobody was able to see who shot the gun. A night that altered everything. For George Reeves, the first night of June 15, 1959, started out like any other. Earlier in the evening, he had supper with Leonore Lemon, his fiancée. Reeves' house guest, novelist Robert Condon, joined them again in Benedict Canyon. At first, the night appeared to be tranquil, but around midnight, everything changed. The porch light was turned on, which was a code word in some Hollywood circles. This indicated that visitors were welcome in Beverly Hills. Carol Van Lonkel and William Bliss showed up without invitation in a matter of minutes. In aristocratic social scenes, pop-ins of this type were common. But Reeves was not happy to see them. The atmosphere in the house soon became uneasy. Reeves apparently made it plain that he was irritated by the interruption. The last thing he needed was a party because he had been coping with personal stress. Tensions developed between him and Bliss at one time. George allegedly threatened to evict him, according to witnesses. Emotions were running high upstairs. Known for her direct humor, Leonore Lemon is said to have said something terrifying. George would walk upstairs and sh** himself, she laughed. A few minutes later, there was a reverberation throughout the house. A single, loud gunshot followed by the opening of a drawer. There was silence. In his bedroom, George Reeves was discovered dead. He had been shot in the head and was laying on the bed, naked. There was a bullet stuck in the ceiling and a Luger handgun on the floor. Questions were immediately raised by the shot's angle and the gun's placement. Downstairs, however, the visitors kept drinking as though nothing important had occurred. There was an uncanny silence when the police arrived. Nobody appeared distressed or alarmed. For a home where a death had occurred, the scene was strangely informal. The visitors provided hazy information. No message about self-harm, no indication of a struggle, and no sense of urgency from people within were present. The information didn't add up for investigators. Why was the bullet in the ceiling rather than somewhere else if Reeves had shot himself? Why was the shell casing discovered in a strange location? Above all, why didn't anyone in the house hear any distress signals before the shot? These were warning signs that didn't neatly fall under the self-harm category. The situation was exacerbated by Lemon's peculiar actions. Her casual remark that George feces on his own seemed overly detailed. Police asked if she was trying to hide something or if she knew something. Some even questioned whether she or another visitor had been personally engaged. However, no one was arrested. And within 2 days, the death was determined to be self-harm. Another factor to take into account is the peculiar open house culture that existed in Hollywood at the time. There was little privacy in the lives of many celebrities. Homes frequently became the scene of late-night gatherings. It's possible that Reeves was struggling with the psychological effects of being interrupted frequently and not having any control over his personal space. He might have become much more frustrated in those settings. Even if what transpired at that house wasn't planned, it was driven by chaos, an excessive number of people, drink, and a lack of clear boundaries. There was no longer any safety in the house. It was a place where anything was possible. As a sad conclusion to a waning star, the media grabbed on the story. But questions emerged beneath the headlines. Why did the visitors seem so aloof? What made the timeline seem so tidy? And why were the discrepancies not mentioned in the official narrative? The case was re-examined by new authors and investigators years later. They discovered proof of hasty choices and careless police work. One detail is frequently overlooked. Reeves' body has several unexplained bruises. Others remarked on how the evidence was left unguarded and how swiftly the house was cleaned. These don't indicate a careful investigation. They indicate that something is being swept away. The passing of George Reeves was more than a personal sorrow. It was a mystery encased in odd conduct, unsolved issues, and a society that valued silence over the truth. It's still unknown what actually transpired in that residence, but one thing is for sure. For such a chaotic evening, the official narrative seemed overly straightforward. The official narrative. Almost immediately, the Los Angeles Police Department declared that George Reeves' death was the result of self-harm. They claimed he had no future in Hollywood, was sad, and was upset by his stagnant career. According to the coroner's assessment, the angle of the wound was consistent with a self-inflicted shot. As support, they also cited the gunshot casing discovered beneath his body. Until the facts were carefully considered, officials believed the investigation was closed. From the outset, something didn't sit right. Unusually for a self-harm incident, Reeves was discovered fully nude. Most people, especially popular personalities, don't prefer to die that way. There were also concerns about the body's placement. Reeves would have needed to be bending, lying down in an odd position, and pointing the gun at his own temple in an odd way for the bullet to become stuck in the ceiling. There were further warning signs. All of the fingerprints were eliminated because the rifle had just been cleaned and oiled. Because of this, it was hard to verify whether Reeves actually handled it that evening. Police also discovered 2 more bullet wounds in the bedroom floor. They were never mentioned in the official narrative and did not correspond with the fatal shot. There was no attempt to relate them to anything. The way Reeves' body was handled was among the most grave problems. Before a comprehensive autopsy could be done, his remains may have been washed and partially embalmed. As a result, crucial forensic evidence was lost. In order to determine whether the shot originated from Reeves or someone else's hand, the coroner was unable to test for powder burns. That irrevocably harmed the case, whether it was due to negligence or something more intentional. Those close to Reeves were aware of these flaws in the probe. Helen Bisolo, his mother, denied the self-harm allegation right away. She thought her son had been murdered. In the hopes that they would uncover information that the police had overlooked, Helen engaged private investigators. However, doors closed on them each time they posed the difficult questions. Helen's team encountered significant opposition. There were no records. Witnesses' accounts were altered. Unjustified leads were dropped. The case seems to have been surrounded by a wall. The truth wasn't something or someone's desire. The odd aspects of the case were covered by the media, but Reeves' depression remained the main emphasis. The explanation was simple enough for the general people to comprehend. A fading actor typecast as Superman, alone and despairing, it made for a neat tale. However, the mess underlying was overlooked in that report. The LAPD's situation in the 1950s is another piece of the puzzle. The department had strong connections to influential Hollywood studios at the time. High-level interests were known to be protected by police officers. Reports were suppressed and facts were misrepresented when high-profile figures were in danger of controversy. It had nothing to do with fairness. It had to do with image control. It's possible that Reeves' death was more than just a straightforward tragedy. Before the truth could be revealed, it might have been cleaned up. There was an incentive to avoid murder if a significant person was implicated, such as a studio executive, Denny Betu, a colleague with ties to the mob, or even a personal friend of Reeves. In that light, the hasty decision and improper management of the evidence start to make more sense. What many people in Hollywood whispered behind closed doors is also consistent with this theory. Some people thought the police handled the situation well. They deleted it. The trail was already dead by the time reporters or investigators attempted to follow up. Witnesses lost their credibility. The tangible proof was either lost or tainted. A case that might have been resolved ended in a dead end. The firearm, a German Luger, was not even thoroughly inspected. There was no gunpowder residue test, no fingerprints, no ballistic comparison with the 2 extra holes in the floor. Despite being fundamental to a good death inquiry, these measures were omitted. The official story loses credibility the more you examine it. Without doing some significant mental acrobatics, nothing about that night makes sense. Furthermore, poor processes are no longer the only issue when the coroner and police appear more concerned with wrapping up the case than with discovering the truth. It has to do with a potential cover-up. Strange circumstances weren't the only reason George Reeves died. Deeper inquiries are warranted given the degree of carelessness or control with which his death was handled. Perhaps it was more than a hasty conclusion. Maybe someone didn't want this case solved at all. And perhaps that someone was able to ensure that it would never be. He got everything from his ex. Within days, his fiancée departed. Something icy, cunning, and maybe lethal lurked underneath the relationship. The women in his life. Leonore Lemon, a very wild nightclub socialite, was George Reeves' last romantic partner. She was feisty, youthful, and frequently erratic. Bull. Reeves' relationship was viewed as unhealthy by many close to him. Reports of shattered furniture and screaming clashes behind closed doors were common, as were public fights. The romance was obviously passionate but far from steady. Leonore wasn't merely upset. She was possessive and envious. According to a number of witnesses, Reeves had had enough of her and was thinking of ending their relationship. According to reports, Lemon took rejection very seriously. Her actions were characterized by several people as dangerous and domineering. She hurried to New York after his death, leaving more questions than answers in her wake. Regarding the evening of Reeves's death, Leonore provided contradictory statements. Just before the fatal shooting, she made a joke about him ***ing himself, which seems oddly prescient or maybe planned. She laughed it off and said it was an accident when asked about the 2 other bullet holes. Given that someone had recently passed away, that kind of casual reaction prompted questions. She evaded severe questioning and was never questioned further by the LAPD. The scene was further complicated by the partygoers that evening. Even though William Bliss was only a passing acquaintance and not a close buddy, he was present and managed to discover the body first. Another visitor was Carol Van Lonkel, who was allegedly romantically involved with Robert Condon. Reeves had been sharing a home with a house guest. For a man who was reputed to be withdrawn and gloomy, their presence was incomprehensible. Why was there a social event at all if Reeves was experiencing suicidal thoughts? Condon's behavior was similarly unusual. According to reports, he drank downstairs while police worked upstairs at the crime site. It was not as urgent or as concerned as someone who had recently lost a friend. Instead of responding to a tragedy, the entire company pretended to be watching a scene play out. In private, some detectives observed that nobody in the house shown much grief. However, Toni Mannix was arguably the most important lady in Reeves' life. She was the spouse of Eddie Mannix, a strong studio enforcer with suspected ties to the mob who worked for MGM. Despite being older than George, Toni was incredibly loyal. During their relationship, she treated him in luxury and purchased a house and a car for him. According to friends, she did not treat George as a partner, but rather as a possession. The consequences from Reeves leaving Toni for Leonore was painful and potentially harmful. Toni felt ashamed and heartbroken. Given that her marriage to Eddie Mannix was more of an open secret than a private one, some claimed she was embarrassed in front of Hollywood people. Their romance didn't simply stop with the split. It broke the strong shield that Toni had provided for Reeves. That defense might have become dangerous. According to sources, Toni stole George's dog as part of his petty retaliation. Even more unsettling, though, was what she reportedly said to Lois Lane actress Noelle Neal in the hours following her passing. Neal claims that Toni contacted and claimed that George had been slain. It was not presented as a suspicion or a query. It was a declaration of fact. Later in life, there were allegations that Toni Mannix had confessed on his deathbed. According to legend, she informed a priest that George had been murdered and that she was aware of the perpetrator. Many have dismissed this as confusion or emotional guilt. From a different angle, though, it might have been a planned action, a means of relieving herself before passing away. Additionally, to prevent her from carrying secrets into the afterlife. The story takes on a perilous new dimension if Toni was truly aware of something. It also refocuses attention on Eddie Mannix. He was notorious for resolving scandals, cover-ups, threats, and issues for MGM stars. It's easy to imagine drastic measures being taken if Eddie believed that Reeves posed a threat to her mental health or if Tony requested him for assistance. The Mannixes could no longer employ Reeves, and he might no longer be safe. Following the incident, nobody who had been a part of Reeves' life at the time acted normally. The details kept coming up, from the ex-lover's odd phone call to the fiancé's quick departure to the impassive guests. Everybody had something they didn't want to discuss, or at the absolute least, something they wanted to hide. There was more than anarchy all around George Reeves. Everyone around him had secrets, opportunities, and motives. It's not a scenario of self-harm. There is a storm there just waiting to be discovered. Behind the curtain, the studio monster. There was more to Eddie Mannix than just a name in the credits. He was the best fixer in MGM. When they were having problems and wanted them to go away, the man stars called. Mannix, who was well known for his brutal methods, was close to Mickey Cohen and Bugsy Siegel, two prominent members of organized crime. He was responsible for using bribes, threats, and cover-ups to preserve the studio's reputation at any costs. Some even thought he orchestrated deadly mishaps when a controversy was about to surface. Mannix has been connected to a number of dubious incidents throughout the years, including forced abortions and inexplicable deaths. These were statements made by those in the industry, not hearsay from outsiders. Mannix had the ability to make anything appear to be an accident because of his connections to the mob and his silent power. He had an impact on hospitals, funeral homes, and police stations. Mannix had someone to dig the hole if a secret needed to be buried. By the standards of the 1950s, his marriage to Toni Mannix was unique. The two enjoyed what many described as an open marriage, and Tony's extended affair with George Reeves seemed to have Eddie's full backing. He appeared to be a kind, understanding third wheel, even going on vacation with him. On the inside, though, Eddie's tolerance might have been more calculated than real. That arrangement abruptly broke down when Reeves ended his relationship with Tony and started seeing Leonore Lemon. What happened next was a series of odd, non-random things. Reeves was in a mysterious car accident a few weeks prior to his death. The vehicle's brake fluid had been emptied, making the crash seem more like sabotage than an accident. Reeves was injured and admitted to the hospital. There was never any accountability. And the period of time right before his death was too near. According to some researchers, the crash served as a message to stop talking, to stop going forward, and to cease causing trouble. Reeves, however, did not slow down. He was trying to restore his profession, cut links with Tony, and move into a new period of his life. Those who opposed his freedom might have viewed that drive for independence as a threat. Then there is the idea about the firearm that was used to kill Reeves. Details don't add up, despite official allegations that it was his own weapon. Fingerprints were removed by the freshly oiled pistol. That's strange conduct for someone who was about to hurt himself. Additionally, there were no obvious indications that someone had broken into the house, but what if the murderer didn't need to enter? Things get gloomier at this point. William Bliss, the partygoer who discovered the body, is today thought by some to have been more than a mere witness. He might have served as a diversion, someone invited to divert attention from other activities taking place in the premises. It's possible that a second man sneaked into Reeves' room, used a silent weapon to fire the fatal shot, and staged the scene while others were chatting downstairs. It would account for the guests' composed demeanor and the absence of any alarm. The place was big and crowded that night, but no one else was seen coming in or going out. Lights were on, doors were unlocked, and the unexpected crowd had already annoyed Reeves. A few minutes of disarray would have been plenty to execute a targeted, silent strike. Eddie Mannix had the resources and connections to make it appear like a clean self-harm if he wanted the job done correctly. The speed at which the study was concluded is even more concerning. The self-harm theory was accepted by the police without conducting thorough interrogations or investigating obvious warning signs. That kind of rapid response implies an influence from someone powerful. In the 1950s, the LAPD was known for its corruption and close ties to the film industry. The situation might have been resolved before the media had a chance to look further if Mannix had made a few phone calls. It becomes increasingly clear that George Reeves was more than just a man who succumbed to despair. He was caught up in a labyrinth of betrayal, allegiance, and subliminal threats. At the heart of that web stood Eddie Mannix, composed, connected, and potentially deadly. The evidence is more than sufficient to cast doubt on the official version, but it may never be sufficient to convict. This tragedy wasn't limited to Hollywood. It may have been a silent execution. Though he passed away alone, George Reeves was not forgotten. The truth is now coming to light, and the hints now suggest something more significant. What actually became of Superman? Three bleak possibilities remain at the intersection of the enigma surrounding George Reeves' death. The first is self-harm, or he gave up after experiencing rejection, sadness, and a stagnant profession. The second is an accident, in which a furious altercation or negligent gun handling quickly became deadly. The third and most unsettling is the killing. Someone in a position of authority decided that Reeves had grown problematic and took him out in secret. There are supporters of each version, but none can eliminate the odd details that don't quite fit. Even if it was self-harm, the strange body posture, the absence of a note, and the missing fingerprints still call for an explanation. The greased weapon, the guest's silence, and the staging of the event cannot all be explained by an accident. Furthermore, the hasty inquiry and lack of follow-up make more sense if it was murder. What's left is a fog of suspicion, surrounded by shoddy police work, missing evidence, and quiet from the people who should have spoken up. The true cover-up was that quiet. The LAPD handled the matter casually from the start. Without doing much research, the police accepted the coroner's diagnosis of self-harm. Behind the scenes, however, there was pressure from those connected to MGM, a studio that stood to lose everything if one of its most well-known on-screen characters was involved in a controversy. Investigators did not interview everyone in detail. Crucial data were overlooked, and crucial forensic testing were omitted. There's also the media's involvement in influencing public memory. In the 1950s, Hollywood exerted considerable sway over the media. Journalists who wished to maintain their good standing with the studio were given stories. That's how a story about Superman shitting himself was created. Clean, simple, and simple to forget. It was successful. The truth was covered with Reeves as the populace moved on. Toni Mannix comes next. Suspicion was aroused by her weird timing, peculiar demeanor, and emotional outbursts. On her deathbed, she allegedly told a priest something, but the testimony was never made public. It was dismissed as illusion or grief. Eddie Mannix, who might have played behind the scenes, was never even given a serious investigation. His silence spoke volumes, and his mic kept him unharmed. The majority of the case's important players have since left. The Mannixes, Reeves, Lemon, and the partygoers have all passed away. The opportunity to obtain a first-hand account is irrevocably lost. What's left, though, is a trail of hints that point to a larger picture. The tale of how quiet, image, and fear used to rule the entertainment industry. Additionally, how the machine behind the screen could demolish even a superhero. The death of George Reeves tells us more than just how a man passed away. It exposes what celebrity cannot change. He was well known, had a devoted following, and was a national celebrity. Behind the mask, however, he was emotionally trapped, typecast, and alone. Behind a cloak and a smile, his hardships were concealed from the public. There was more to Hollywood than sparkle and glamour during the Golden Age. It was a place where careers terminated abruptly and secrets were promptly buried. The lives of stars were closely controlled, and they were products. Someone could be removed in one manner or another if they started to cause problems or pose a threat to the brand. One of those casualties might have been Reeves. The truth concerning George Reeves may never be formally solved. The truth is still there, though. Each evidence, each discrepancy leads to something more than the official story. His passing destroyed the myth that Hollywood was unbeatable, whether it was due to a hushed dispute, a masterfully orchestrated hit, or a profound sadness that no one really noticed. On screen, Superman did not perish in battle with a villain. Among others who ought to have assisted but chose not to, he passed away by himself in the dark. Because it touches on a subject greater than the fate of a single man, Reeves' narrative is nevertheless significant today. It demonstrates how silence and power may skew justice. It serves as a reminder that behind every happy celebrity, there may be a person going through difficult times that are hidden from view. It also serves as a warning that the truth can quickly disappear if it poses a threat to the wrong individuals.